Have you ever tried decluttering your house and somehow the mess just got worse? Or maybe you looked at your home and thought, I probably need to downsize, but then you realize you're not actually moving. So, how exactly is that supposed to work? The truth is, most people think there are only two options when it comes to dealing with the things in our home. You either declutter or you downsize. But there's actually a third option called right sizing, and it's the one I probably talk about the most. The problem is, just knowing there are three options still doesn't tell you which one is the right fit for you. So today, we're going to look at all three, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which method fits you best. Hey there, my name is Tracy Lynn, and I help midlife women and men learn how to right size their homes so they fit the life they're living today. And I'll be honest, sometimes my videos get just a little bit of grief on the internet. Some people think I'm talking down on decluttering, and other people think I'm trying to take credit for organizing ideas. And that's really the last thing I'm trying to do. My goal is actually very simple. I want to help a group of women that often gets overlooked in this industry. Women who have lived full and amazing lives and now find themselves living in homes that are carrying layers and layers of those years. Homes that still work in theory, but have too much stuff for everyday living to feel comfortable or relaxed. And if that sounds like you are exactly who I'm here for. Okay, so let's get real for just a second, because what I talk about on this channel is pretty different from other organizing channels. So like I said before, many believe that there are only two ways to deal with the stuff in their home. You either declutter your home or you downsize your home. And for years, I thought those were the only two options as well. So, like a lot of people, I started with the decluttering approach and all the advice that goes with it, like go room to room and sort through everything you own, or touch every item and decide if you should keep it, or follow one of those big decluttering plans where you are suddenly making hundreds or even thousands of decisions all at once. And yes, for some people, those approaches work really, really well. And I'm not here to talk down any of them. But for a lot of women who find this channel, those methods, they sound good in theory, but they just don't work in real life. And maybe you tried one or more of those approaches and thought, why isn't this working for me? And why does my house now look like a tornado just tore through it? Okay, that second one might just be me. So the next thing people start thinking is they look at downsizing, right? Maybe that means moving to a smaller home. Maybe it means reducing what you have because your life is changing. Less space, less storage, and finally dealing with all the things that have built up over the years. And downsizing can absolutely work really well for a lot of people too. But sometimes even that doesn't solve the problem. Because what if your home still works and you're just surrounded by things that belong in a life you used to live? And that's when a third option comes into play, which is probably a relief, because maybe at this point you're starting to think that you are the problem. Well, guess what? You are not. Because there is a third option, and I call it right sizing. This is the approach that helped me go from constantly fighting clutter in my home to a home that finally fits my space and the life I'm living today. It's a completely different way to look at your things. Now, if you've heard me talk about right sizing before, stick with me, because in this video, I'm going to break down the difference between decluttering, downsizing, and right sizing so you can choose the method that will work for you best. Because I really don't believe there's only one method that works for everyone, and that might be the best news yet. Okay, so before we dive into the nitty-gritty of right-sized living, we need to take a closer look at the other two options first. Even though at this point you might already be thinking, yes, right sizing sounds like exactly what I need, I want you to be 100% sure. Because there's nothing worse than getting excited about a new method, trying it out, and realizing it doesn't actually work for you and it's not the solution you've been looking for. Okay, so let's start with decluttering. Decluttering is actually an amazing way to reduce the mess and chaos in a home. And if you look up the official definition of decluttering, it says something like this: removing unnecessary items from an untidy or overcrowded space. And when you read that definition, it sounds pretty straightforward, right? Less stuff, neater home. And that's exactly why decluttering works so well for a lot of people, especially younger people who are really only dealing with one layer of belongings in their home. But for many of us, midlife and beyond, we're facing something just a little bit different. We're not dealing with one layer, we're dealing with many layers. Layers we've collected over decades, from raising families, having careers, hobbies, raising kids, different phases of life, right? And when you try to use traditional decluttering methods on decades of life all at once, it can become incredibly time consuming. So time consuming that many women start the process with great intentions and then burn out before they feel like they've made any real progress at all. Now, that doesn't mean decluttering advice is completely off the table. There are actually some really great tips out there that still work beautifully later in life. And one of my favorites is what I call gradual decluttering, which is something I talk a lot about on this channel. So the idea is really simple. You keep a donation box out somewhere in the home. And whenever you notice something you no longer need, you just toss it in the box and move on with your day. No big project, no hard decisions. It's really hard to say. Just small moments that help you reduce the stuff in your home naturally over time. And that's a really practical way to start reducing what you have without turning the whole thing into a full scale event, right? Okay, now the second approach we're going to talk about is downsizing. And downsizing is just a little bit different because you're usually doing it for the purpose of a specific event, which is quickly approaching, right? And I actually love the idea of downsizing, and it's something I talk about frequently on my channel. So if you look up that definition, you will find something like this: reducing what you have for the purpose of moving to a smaller place of residence. And when you think about that definition, it really does make a lot of sense, right? Because when someone is getting ready to move into a smaller home, they know they will not have the same amount of space they have now. There's going to be fewer closets, less storage, smaller bedrooms. So decisions have to be made about what will actually fit into that new space. And that's why downsizing can work really well for people who are preparing for that kind of move. But again, many of the women who watch this channel are not planning to move right now. They actually like the homes they're living in, right? They just want their homes to work better for how they're living today. And that's where some of the ideas from downsizing can still be helpful, even if you're not packing boxes and getting ready to move out of your home. One idea that works really well is something I like to call reducing multiples. Because over the years, most homes collect so many extras like extra blankets, extra sheets, extra kitchen tools, and gadgets. Things that made sense at one time when our homes were busy and full, but may not really be needed anymore today. A simple example of this might be coffee mugs, something I love to use as an example. Okay, so at some point, we all probably started with 2, maybe 4, right? And before we knew it, there were 15 or 20 in the cabinet. Again, that might just be me. Some were gifts, some came from going on vacations, some just seemed really cute at the time and you just had to have it, right? And while we may only use the same 2 to 3 every single day, the rest are still there taking up space. Downsizing can help you make sense of overcrowded areas by reducing some of the extras. Not because you're moving, but simply because your life may not need that much anymore. And making those small adjustments can help a home start to feel lighter and easier to live in. And for many people, that approach also works really, really well. And that brings us to our third option, right sizing. And it might just be the reason why you're here today. Okay, so the right sizing is a method that I came up with when I moved into my empty nester home and realized I still had way too much stuff and it just wasn't going to fit. I'd already decluttered for years preparing for that move, right? Then I downsized out of 3 storage units just to get everything into my house. And after all of that, I still found myself living in a space that felt overcrowded and overstuffed. And that's when I realized something. Neither decluttering nor downsizing was going to fix this current situation. So I needed something just a little bit different. I needed a brand new approach that would help me choose exactly what belonged in my home for the life I was living right now. Something that would help me see the things that were from the past and no longer needed, as well as help me recognize what I was holding on to for a future that just might never come, leading me to set up a home that fit just right. Now, If you try to look up the definition of right sizing, you're actually going to find one. And it says something like this: to convert something to an appropriate or optimized size. And when I first read that definition, I thought that actually describes exactly what we're trying to do in our homes, right? Because right sizing your home is really about adjusting what you keep so your home works better for how you're living today. But it's missing one really important piece. Your life is what sets the boundaries. So, what I mean by that is you want to fill your home with the things you actually use in your day to day life, not the life you lived 20 years ago, and not the life you imagine you might live someday. Your life right here, right now. So, the way I define right size living is pretty simple. Right sizing is removing what is no longer needed and keeping what you actually use in your everyday life. All right. So now that we have all of that theory stuff out of the way, let's talk about the practical side of this. Because understanding what right sizing means is one thing, but the real question most people have is this: how do you actually use it in your home? And more importantly, how do you know if right sizing is really the method that is going to work for you? The way you figure it out is pretty simple. You start small. This approach is different than decluttering because you're not setting aside an entire weekend to work on the house. Right sizing is meant to be small, so the spaces you work on need to be small too. Think one area on your kitchen counter, or one shelf inside of a cabinet, or one drawer in your bathroom. And I know right now you might be panicking just a tiny bit because you're thinking, oh my gosh, my house has so much stuff. How is one shelf ever going to make a difference? And actually, those small areas do more than you might realize, because even though they don't seem like much, at first, especially, they're actually building a foundation of how the right size living method works. Because when you work in small spaces, something starts to happen. You begin to see your things just a little bit differently. You start noticing items that belong to a life you lived in the past, right? The things you constantly pass over. You begin recognizing items you're saving for a future, one that might not ever come. And you start seeing the things that feel just right, the items that you're constantly using day to day. And when that change happens, the decisions become so much easier. Not because someone told you what you were supposed to keep and what you're supposed to get rid of, but because your life chose for you. That's big. And something else begins to grow with each small space that you work through: confidence. Confidence that your home can start to change in a way that actually makes everyday living easier. And that is why small steps matter so much. Okay, now let me give you just a couple of examples of what this looks like in real life. One really common example is what I like to call skinny clothes. So many of us have clothes in our closets that we're keeping for a day when we might lose the weight so we're able to wear them again. Yep, that was me. Maybe it's a pair of jeans you loved years ago, or maybe it's a dress you wore to something special and you're hoping that you can someday fit into it again. But the truth is, those clothes often carry a very different story with them, because every time you see them hanging there, they're quietly reminding you of something. If you would just lose the weight, you could wear these again. And even if you don't realize it at the time, that pressure shows up every time you open the closet door. I remember when I finally got rid of my skinny clothes, I felt like a weight literally lifted off my shoulders. I hadn't even realized how much pressure they were putting on me until they were gone. Because suddenly, my closet was filled with clothes that worked for my life today, not some imaginary version of me who apparently has a very different relationship with carbs, right? So now my closet is filled with things I love to wear, things I reach for time and time again. And that is the change that right sizing creates. Instead of holding on to things that belong to a future version of your life, you begin choosing things that support the life you're living right now. All right, let me give you one more, because sometimes things aren't emotional and sometimes they're just practical, right? So let's look at something super simple, like throw blankets. So over the years, we pick them up everywhere, just like our coffee mugs. One from a sale, we got some as a gift, one we bought because it matched our couch perfectly, or maybe one because it looks super cozy in the store. And before we know it, there are 10 or 15 blankets in our family room. And maybe when all of your kids were at home, your house was full, that number made total sense. But If there are only you and maybe you and your partner living in the house now, the question becomes pretty simple. How many blankets make sense today? Maybe the answer is 3, maybe it's 4, but it probably isn't 15. And that's the beauty of right sizing. You're not making emotional decisions about every single item. You're simply, sorry, that's my dog. You're simply looking at your home and asking, does this support the life I'm living today? And when you start asking that question, the answers become clear. Here's the thing about right size living. It's pretty practical, and it may be the reason why I love it so much, right? There's no complicated blueprint, no long list of steps you have to follow in order to get it exactly right. It's simpler than that. It's you look at something, you decide if it belongs, and you move on. And that's it in a nutshell. And it's those decisions that begin to add up, giving you a drawer that's easier to use, a closet that you love going into, or a room that finally starts to breathe again. And before long, your home starts to feel like it fits your life instead of holding all the layers and all the things you've collected over time. And that might be the one reason you need to give this method a try. All right, that's all I have for you today. Now, before you go, please let me know in the comments. After you heard this video, which one feels like the best approach for you? Was it decluttering? Was it downsizing? Or does right sizing feel like the approach that finally makes sense? You know, that's the one I'm secretly voting for. Let me know in the comments because I always love hearing about your own journey. Again, my name is Tracy Lynn, and if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe so I can keep creating content that helps you build a home that fits your life today. I release a new video every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, so join me next week so you can see it right when it drops. And if you would like to learn more about right size living, get our free guide. The link is in the comments below. All right, take care. I'll see you next time. Bye.